Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there folks, and welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin and co-host Darren Brennan as always, and today we're going to be answering and talking through a very interesting topic, Darren. Are fixed site costs really fixed? Now, last week we revealed a few things about engineering plans and make sure that you do not buy a block without seeing a building consultant. And this week we're following on from that, Darren. We're going to talk about a few things and realistically we're going to educate people on some of the areas that fixed no longer becomes fixed, aren't we, mate? So how you going today, buddy? You good?
Yeah, going well, mate, going well. It's an interesting subject, Cole, in this whole when is fixed not actually fixed and how does that sort of play out for the customer and, what are their, what are their rights and it's certainly difficult. And we're probably seen over the last couple of years, this be more relevant than ever before, as certainly, 2 years ago when builders' margins were under attack, it seemed that there was a bit more exclusions coming into play than what had been previous. And I'd like to hope that maybe a little bit of that settled down and that builders are taking responsibility where they can for the costs that they've, incurred and that they've, sold to a customer. So it's just understanding where that sits, really. So, yeah, let's kick in, mate.
Yeah, no worries.
It's about site costs.
So, yeah, I think probably to set the tone, Darren, I want to explain to people a little bit. So everyone expects fixed site costs these days, and most of the time, absolutely most of the time, the fixed site costs that are provided remain the fixed site costs that they end up being, right? So this is not to scare anyone about their site costs. I'm talking, that sometimes things happen, but we want to educate you on that. So it's a bit like one of the examples I've used in a previous presentation of this is like if I rang up a mechanic and I said, mate, can you please give me a quote to fix my car? And he says, well, what year is it? And I said, it's 2010 Toyota, whatever, and then he says, oh, yeah, how many Ks? And I say, it's got 100,000 Ks on it. And then he goes, oh, look, the cost would be this. So based on the information I gave him, the cost it'll be $400, right? And then I bring the car in and it's an absolute bomb and it's torn to shreds and pieces and it's nowhere near to the level of what he expected and what he quoted on. And then he looks and says, mate, it's not going to be $400. It's going to be $4,000 to fix that thing. Right, that's what happens sometimes. We get engineering plans, and then the result of when the actual block is ready and titled and ready to build on, sometimes you can look at it and go, oh, wow, that's actually a bit more of a bomb than what the engineering may have indicated to begin with, right? So hopefully that's an analogy people can understand. When it comes to that example, what I should have done is brought the car into the mechanic and said, mate, have a look at this car. He would have said $4,000 because he's got all the information. When it comes to new home building, the truth, the absolute God's honest truth is that in order for a builder to quote fixed site costs properly, they need soil test, survey, working drawings, even to visit the site. They need all the information. However, that's not the market we live in. 10, 15 years ago, fixed site costs up front were created, and they're created on the basis of an engineering plan, which is the initial preliminary information that we're given. It's all we can go off. It's here are the levels that block is going to be, by the time it's titled and ready to build on. Sometimes it doesn't end up being that way though. So whilst builders respect that the market wants fixed site costs, I just wanted to highlight the other side of it, Darren, that the truth is that they should be fixing once they have all the information, but the market's now forcing us to fix based on limited information. And as a result, every single builder out there is taking a huge risk by doing this. So naturally the clauses and the terms and the fine print in the site costs that are fixed site costs. They vary between builders, and I'll get you to jump in a little bit. They're essentially going to have get out clauses for these reasons. Okay, so it's not a builder being dodgy or hiding costs. This is about understanding and trying to educate you, the viewer or the listener, of why there may be some instances where things can change.
And I think we often talk about what are the inclusions. What we're referring to here is what are the exclusions. And there should be, if they are going to exclude some stuff, the builder really should be detailing that to you up front. So at least you're aware. And that's all we ask. It's just you be aware of the situation. So, it certainly helps. The other bit is we spoke in the last episode, Cole, about fill, fall, and easements. So more fill, more cost, more fall, more cost, closer to easements, more costs. All the same apply with fixed site costs as well. The risks are higher with more fall, the risks are higher with more fill, and the risks are higher the closer you build to an easement. So again, some of the exclusions that are there, and sometimes when builders have to come back and charge more, is because something's gone wrong somewhere in those sort of items. Fill, fall, easements, probably rock. They're your ones, right? So that being said, like I did say, the start, there's probably been a little bit of movement, 2 years ago, seeing a bit of rumblings where people were particularly where builders' margins were really low. They weren't making money building houses at that stage. We're back to builders making money building houses, so they've got a little bit of a buffer to play with, and they assume a risk. But for the most part, most fixed site costs don't change. They just don't change a lot, right? So you can sort of hope and be somewhat confident that it's unlikely that's going to change. But it's important to understand that it still can change. There still will be some exclusions. So, and every builder will have exclusions. So read through the fine print, talk to your builder's rep, understand what they are. It's about their risks and tolerances. How far can they stretch that envelope, right? They can't. The last thing you want to do is see your builder, and again, depending on the size of your builder, right? You might be building it with a builder who builds one home a year. Well, if they can't make money on that one home, they go broke. Right, so you might be building with someone who builds thousands of homes a year. Again, they don't want to be losing money, and you don't want your builder losing money because you might think that's really fortuitous, and you did well out of that, and I screwed them for a great deal. But in the end, you want your builder to be around not only to build your home, but also for the warranty period that the home's warranted under as well, so that you don't have any headaches. Just pick up the phone and deal with your builder. It's happy days. So just be mindful of where that sits, I guess. The reality is blocks with excessive fall, excessive fill may not even be able to be fixed at all, or if they're fixed, there may be extra terms and conditions on that. So understand. But I guess there's probably maybe there's 5 real key items, Cole, that come into play, I guess, when we're talking about fixed site costs. So maybe you kick off with number 1. What would be the first one that comes into play?
Yeah, so number 1, and again, reiterating that this doesn't happen often in terms of changing fixed site costs, but it can happen. The engineering plan that the consultant has based your site costs on, and the builder therefore, can often be different to what the block ends up being when they go to build on it, right? So the levels can be different. So let's say your block was nice and flat, it had 400 mil of fall proposed, or reasonably flat, 400 mil of fall proposed, and no fill. Nice, pretty simple block, Darren. But then they get to the soil test, the survey, get through all that sort of stuff, and the survey tells us that there's actually 650 mil of fall on that block. It's not a huge amount. You're talking about, let's say, less than a ruler more, but that's still enough to trigger extra works and requirements. And in our case, that would trigger retaining walls, doing retaining walls for considering landscaping, things like that. So that could then add a fair bit of cost. So in the event that happens, which again is very rare, it's common for it to happen, but only in a minor figure. It's pretty rare for it to happen in a substantial manner. where it does impact the fixed site costs that were provided up front. But that's definitely one situation, Darren, where it can be. And this is just about educating buyers on that. The engineering plan was different to the actual block that was delivered. Yeah.
Cole, a couple of reasons that they can be different. You may have a really early preliminary one, so it's worth checking, is this the first version? Is there 10 versions? In which case, get version 10, right? Ask the question. So, again, if you're seeing it's a really early one, it's, predated, is it the finalised construction drawing? That'd be the one you really want to get, the finalised end drawing. That'd be awesome. You'll get more information on that. It'll be more accurate. So, a couple of those things to consider is, what version of the engineering plan is it? The other part you mentioned, if you think about it like this, if you have 10 centimetres, which is not a lot of additional fall, and you have a 200 square metre home, if you have to excavate out all of that, so that whole 10 centimetres, because of the UNCC rule, for example, and you're trying to keep your garage, driveway gradient to work and a flat transition in, so you excavate out that, you're talking about 20 cubic metres of soil. It's a huge amount of soil. That's like, if you see those trucks at a truck and a trailer, that's the truck bit, full, maybe a bit more of soil. So it's a lot of soil to remove from that site. So that's why that a small increment of change can have a significant cost difference, depending on how that, is going to be built on that site. Number two, Cole, I'd say it'd be screw piles. So most likely screw piles may not have been included. They'd often do board piers if they're needed. And again, when the engineer itself comes back with the slab design of that home, it may well be that based on the soil conditions after the soil test has arrived, that screw piles are required. Then often that additional cost for screw piles will be passed on. Screw piles are often used too in deep fill. So again, engineering plan might be showing a certain amount of fill, but it actually ends up being deeper than that, or it's very loose soil beneath. It's considered to be very much like fill. And they might need to go down, instead of going down a couple of metres, they need to go down 3 or 4 metres. Builders would generally pass that cost on to the consumer because it was an unassumed sort of item. It was not something that's common that you'd have to do. And again, they'd come back with that information and say, hey, by the way, unfortunately in this case, there's a little bit of additional cost and we've got to pass that cost on. And I think that's one that you can kind of understand why. What's number 3, Cole?
Yeah, so I'd probably just add to that again, that's not a hidden cost. That's a surprise cost based on the real conditions, and the builder's doing right by you by making that call because they want to make sure your house is and the foundations of your home are properly done, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's not ideal because it's more money, but you understand where the bill is coming from. Yeah. So number 3, Darren, is rock, and I think this is a really interesting one because again, like site costs in general, rock has a lot of, get out, clauses or exclusions or fine print, and rightfully so. So again, builders take a huge risk, by fixing rock. Some builders will fix rock. Some builders will have rock included up to a certain number of cubic meters. Some will fix it up to a certain distance from an easement. And like I said, some will completely fix it, subject to additional core drilling or blasting that's required. So there's all these little reasons and bits and pieces that go above and beyond. And I think, Darren, the challenge with rock is no one really knows how bad it is if it is. So as far as the process is concerned, we generally get what's called a soil test and a feature survey done. So as a result of those, the guys, they dig or drill a borehole in your block, and they go as deep as they sort of can to a point, but sometimes they hit a rock, but no one knows if that's just one little rock that's there or if the whole block is full of them, so we call that refusal, right? And in some cases the reality is, we've got 6 boreholes and 3 of them showed refusal and rock. it still doesn't tell us how much rock there is, you know. So yeah, it's only one way, unfortunately, to find out how much rock there is, and that's to start the construction, and you know, start ripping the site out ready for construction to see how much rock needs to be pulled out, and only at that time can it be priced as to whether it needed additional drilling or additional blasting or additional over the cubic meters that have been allowed. So I would be. Well, it's not a matter of being careful, Darren. I think you just be mindful that it's something that can happen.
Yeah.
I think with screw piles and rock, we haven't had many examples, and I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of jobs that went by just fine without any or only minor increases. But there were a few jobs that had substantial add-ons because they were just bad luck. Those blocks were just bad luck, and it's not the builder's fault. It's not the client's fault. It's not the land agent's fault. It's no one's fault. It is what it is. So, again, we don't want to scare you. It's just these are the reasons. You know, fixed site costs can change. Yeah,
absolutely. Another one, Cole, that we do come across more often these days, and I think developers have, because the blocks are getting smaller. You know, we've seen blocks go from 36s down to 32 metre deep to 28. Now we're getting down into 25s, 21 metre deep, even 16 metre deep blocks. So we tend to be building closer to easements, and developers are trying to fit more in less area, basically. So what we're seeing is the sewer tie, which is the connection point between your home and the sewer system that's in the ground that your sewer is going to connect to, often is built outside of an easement or right to the absolute edge of an easement. And if your home's not a metre away from that, which is what the regulation says, you've got to actually relocate that pipe, and that's not cheap. So one thing you can do, put a smaller house on. Most people don't want to do that, or relocate the pipe. And look, there's a few $1,000s involved in relocating the pipe. It's not cheap, but that's the only way you can actually connect to that sewer connection and move forward. So we do see that more and more as blocks get smaller and smaller, and people are building as much house as they can on that block. So again, you know, good rule of thumb is if you can be a metre off an easement, that's a great position to be. Most builders will allow you to build a bit closer, depending on how much fall, how much fill, etc. These same situations we're talking about will, you know, determine how close to that easement you can build. But again, sometimes it'll show on the engineering the sewer tie outside of the easement. Other times it won't. It's just whether that information is available at the time of the builder doing their site costs, is whether they'll have calculated for that in there.
Yeah, and that information we obviously get properly detailed further down the track, and that's when it's flagged. It's like, oh, we need a sewer tie cut back.
And that isn't available, Colin, until after the land's titled.
That's
to
right.
Get all of that information. So after we get the property services information, which is generally 4 to 6 weeks after the land's titled, is when we get it. So, you know, it's found out quite late in the process.
And again, it's not a hidden thing. It's okay, we didn't know that was the case, and now we do know that's the case. It's going to cost, you know, $2.5-3.5 grand to get the sewer tie cut back sorted, or, you know, relocation as you called it. So that's just something that can happen. We can look at the engineering, the site plan of your home and the engineering, and see where that's proposed to be. And if you're getting close to it, you could probably put in an allowance for sewer tie cutback is one option. We try and do that ourselves down a little bit. And again, that's another one of those costs that clients say, well, that builder's not putting it in. I'm like, well, that builder's not, they have no idea what they're doing, or not builder, that's incorrect. But the consultant has deliberately missed it. Yeah.
It could also be that their house is shorter.
Yeah.
And it's not required. They're more than a metre away. Or their house design's slightly different shape. They could have like a longer part and a shorter part at the back of the home, like go around like this. So, you know, those things could impact whether it's going to impact their house design or not. But your builder's saying it'll impact the design that you're looking at building with them. So they put it in rightfully so if they know about it.
Yeah. So, and if they don't, they put it in, you should be grateful for that, and it can be credited back, right? So it's great if they put it in and it's not needed, but just something to flag for you guys out there that it's something that pops up. And then probably leading on from that, Darren, is a very similar one. Point number 5 is just realistically that the available connections, making sure that they're all in place. Now, if you buy from a greenfield estate, I mean, 99.99% of the time, it's going to happen. They'll be fine, nothing to worry about. But sometimes you buy a block, an older block or something like that, and you would assume, the electricity, etc., it's all ready to go and connect into for the builder to rock and roll. But sometimes it's not. So in that case, the builder's going to say, hey, there's no connection. We can't get to it. Or in order to get to it, we need to, go a bit further for the run-ins and things like that. Then that would be additional cost. It comes up sometimes. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I guess there's a bit of a bonus one, Cole, and builders will price different things into their site costs. So some will price things such as council requirements like temporary fencing in there, or they'll price in silt protection because it's required on that block, or they'll price in potentially termite protection if it's required in there. And that could be in the site cost figure already, or it may be separate to the site cost figure. I guess more just to say, not everyone, what they say is included is the same as the next guy's what's included. So if the first guy's including that stuff in his site costs, their site cost could be more expensive. The next guy doesn't include it, puts it in as separate items. Their site costs are cheaper, but they're just separate items in the quote. So, it's hard to compare apples to apples in respect to that. And sometimes they'll include stuff like an additional solar panel for your hot water service if you've got solar hot water, or they'll include some additional stuff that might be required to meet the 7-star requirement because they think that, based on your orientation, you're going to need some additional costs. So they put it in the site costs and it's sort of there, but is it? And there's a bit of unknown around that. So, I guess just be mindful that some of those additional costs sometimes are pseudo considered site costs. I don't think they are. I think they're separate costs altogether. But just understand that some will talk about them being in your site costs, not being in your site costs. Just again, ask more questions, read the fine print. If in doubt, again, feel free to reach out to us. We'll help you guide you through that as well if you've got any questions on that. So
100%. Yep. Listen to this episode, the one before it, and if you scroll back through a fair bit more, there's a full detailed one on builder quotes and site costs and all this sort of stuff. Like, all the information you need is actually here to educate you on what steps you should take and need to take, and completely objective. It's not about who I work for or who Darren works for. It's just giving you the guidance, the insights, the information you need to go and choose one builder that you're happy with, So awesome, Daz. That probably wraps this one up, but I just want to say thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Again, as always, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. And if you've got any feedback, topic ideas, questions, you can come through to us, no problem at all. Just jump onto homebuildinghub.com.au and there's a contact us button there to make it nice and easy. And that's about it. Daz, anything else just to finish off?
No, I hope everyone has a great week ahead and look forward to the next episode.
Beautiful. Thanks, guys. See you on the next one.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Home Building Hub. As part of the podcast, we have to be a little careful to cover ourselves on a legal standpoint. So we do have a disclaimer. Whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered legal or financial advice. It does contain general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your own personal situation before you make any legal or financial decisions.